Hello and welcome to Acumon Analysis, the show where we talk about economics, market conditions and politics and how that impacts you and your business. Welcome to this episode of Acumon Analysis, and today we're going to be discussing the budget that is literally within a couple of days and the rumours around the budget, because there's been quite a few, hasn't there?
There has indeed. This has been 12 months in the making. So ever since the setting of the scene of the last budget, there have been rumours around what is going to happen, and the big reveal is about to occur in a few days' time.
And, you know, we have conversations with business owners, business leaders, CFOs, FDs, and just individuals who might even just have a sole trade business, for example. What's the sentiment of the population right now? Is there excitement? Is there fear? Are people running to the hills or running to Dubai?
Well, probably all of the above. I've never seen anything like it. The client base that I deal with, they tend to be business owners. They tend to have had a little bit more wealth. They tend not to have seen the benefit side in their sort of years to date. But what I would say, the sentiment's fairly clear. They are worried. There is a degree of fear. Why? Well, there are so many rumours that are all negative. They can't all be true, but there's very little positive news going around for them. And, you know, you see large, wealthy people. Let's not use the word large. That's a bit unfair on people. And wealthy people.
Yeah, they're not all large.
They might be, but that's not the point. It's the wealthy people who many assume have better advisors, better knowledge than they have leaving. And to some extent, they're going, should we do the same? That doesn't mean they will. It doesn't mean it's the right thing for them. But you can't help but think it. The press has not been very generous to, Rachel Reeves, maybe with some merit, but they've not been generous. And as a consequence, this is a big budget. I think it's a really hard budget. I'd rather she was giving it than me. This is one that I don't think anyone's going to do this right. There is no rabbit to pull out the hat.
I think she's under a lot of pressure right now to actually sort of perform some sort of miracle, because obviously the Labour government came in saying there's a big black hole. It appears that the black hole's got bigger, and now there's lots of rumours coming out. And let's face it, rumours always come out essentially to get what does the public think of these ideas, kind of feedback, I suppose. And it all looks like it's pointing in one direction, more tax, essentially.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, the black hole, which was the Tory party's fault, so 20 billion or 22 billion pound black hole was allegedly the Tory fault. So the rumours have swelled it up to over 50 billion now. Now, it's probably going back down again, then back up. It's always hard to know exactly what the government heading for. But the rumour of today is there's going to be some mansion tax. It's going to raise some money, but it's going to be blown away on benefit giveaways. So I'm not quite sure how this reconciles with the manifesto, which is about helping hardworking people.
I think there's quite a few things that we've seen from the list that our friend AI has given us in the rumours that seem to sort of go against the working man, which largely Keir Starmer's said over and over again, we will not be taxing working people. And we know from little bits that he does here, there and everywhere, we're starting to get a picture of what the working person is. Farmers isn't one of them, apparently. People who, own shares in a business, I don't think are one of them. And it looks like, well, if the rumours are true, people who are salaried and sole traders aren't working people either. So I'm struggling to know who working people are now, but...
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one. I think that we've elected a Labour Party, a left-of-centre party with a big majority. So that's got to stand for something. And therefore we have to accept that there is going to be a greater use of benefits than maybe if we elected a right-wing party. However, the scale of this is it's a big shift. And the question mark is whether the country's ready for it.
Let's get into it. So point one that AI has helpfully given us is on income tax thresholds. And the rumour at the moment is that they're going to stay put. And this speaks to something that we talk a lot about as a duo, not so much on the podcast, but just when we're out for lunch and things, fiscal drag. And it's something that we should probably break down for people who don't understand it. But it's essentially you being taxed more because your money's worth less, as in your pound today is worth more than in the future. And you might get a pay rise of 10%, which might be in line with inflation, for example, and then you get pushed into a higher tax bracket, even though you're essentially earning the same money. So, that seems to be taxing the working man. What do we think about that?
Look, I think this is the easy one for Labour. It's a good tax raiser for them. It's one that they can stand up with a degree of honesty and say they haven't increased tax. They just haven't allowed for the fact that there's been inflation in everybody's pay packet and everyone's income.
So we saw this coming, maybe.
Yeah, I think, look, and the Tories did it before, and it wasn't the first time it's been done. There's a degree of common sense. This will be part of it. It's already been extended for a couple of years. It will continue to be extended. It raises a lot of money. The public don't object in the same way. I think this is if there's going to be any wins for Rachel Reeves, and there are not going to be many, I think this is one that she can take.
I agree. This is maybe for want of a better phrase, the sneakiest of the taxes, perhaps, or the one she'll get away with the easiest, as in it will fly under the radar for most people who might not understand it, perhaps. So moving on to the next one, there's rumours of a basic rate band going up, say 1 or 2%. That's a bit harder, I think, to swallow, because that's...
If the basic rate band goes up, and you're seeing everybody other than the low earners are paying it. The basic rate band kicks in currently at 12,570 with a per annum. If the rates are frozen, as we just talked about with the fiscal drag, then that is the level. So if you're earning around 12,500, you're now paying an extra 2% on any extra. And that will apply to everybody who's earning, everyone who's got income. But if it's basic rates, it depends on how they apply it. But typically that's earned income and not dividend income. It applies slightly differently, but it could apply to that. We'd have to see the devil in the detail. But it seems to me that that's hitting everyone and it's not helping the working man. If they were to tax it just on investment income, for example, then I think you could argue that the working man isn't paying it. But if it's just a straightforward 2% increase on basic rate tax, then we're moving our rates up 2%.
And there's been a lot of movement at that lowest level of pay. I mean, we've seen, and we spoke about this on the last episode, actually, national minimum wage increases like copious amounts over the last 10 years, as well as a quite a large change to ERS&I, which probably impacts people at the lowest banding or businesses that employ people on the lowest banding. And now this is, again, impacting people on essentially minimum wage still. Is there going to be yet more pressure for those people at the lowest sort of salary levels to kind of be pushing for more? And is that going to impact other things in the economy?
Well, if you earn, say, £17,500 a year, okay, so you're likely to be not full-time employed because minimum wage would give you more than that.
I'd like to think so. Problematic.
Yeah, so you're 17,500 a year.
Yeah.
You're currently going to be paying tax on around about £5,000 of your earnings. That's £1,000 a year plus national insurance. If you're adding 2% to that, that's effectively 10% extra. So that £1,000 goes to £1,100 plus the national insurance impact. It's quite a substantial increase for somebody.
For people on that level of income,
that's the same all the way through. So if you earned, we're paying tax at £10,000 because you earn 50,000 or whatever the figure is, you're earning 50,000, you're paying, I don't know, I haven't done the math, say £8,000 a year. You're now paying 8,800. People are going to find an extra £800, even at the £50,000 threshold. It's going to affect everybody. Again, I go back to it and say this is not a tax for the working man. Hardworking or not, as Keir Starmer says, it's still not a tax for them. And people will not like this tax. This is straightforward, taking out their pay.
Highly emotive, I think,
yeah.
In comparison to what we've just spoken about.
Yep, the last one, the previous one, the fiscal drag, the freezing of the personal allowances, that will not affect anyone. This is going to be a red rag to a bull.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also talk about actually essentially doing like a rate swap. So increasing income tax at the basic rate band by, say, 2%, but reducing ES&I, employees' national insurance, apparently saving £6 billion a year. If you believe the stats.
Well, I mean, that net off, but we're really questioning what's the benefit of doing that. If you take plus 2% at one level and take off 2% at another, again, I suppose you're getting to the cap on the national insurance level, but it seems a very cumbersome way of doing that. I can't see the logic about doing one of the taxes. You've got to raise money. This is what you do, but you don't. That just doesn't make any sense to me. You tax a worker, and then you take off the NIC, so you're netting the same off. But I suppose the benefit of that is that the income which isn't earned income, so those that are earning the money without being subject to national insurance, are paying an extra 2%. But you could easily classify that, say, look, we just got a property tax, you pay another 2%.
I think it'll be, if they were to do that over just increasing income tax, for example, I think it would feel like less of a big deal, even though they apparently are going to raise 6 billion off the back of it. Maybe it's somewhere in between. We've talked about flying under the radar, highly emotive one, and I think that might.
Well, let's look at this. Let's say you're an immigrant, come to this country to work. So let's not get into the small boats crisis. Just you come here to work. You're looking maybe to come here for 5 years.
Yep.
You might not be paying national insurance. You might be paying it in your country of origin. Quite often you protect your benefits there. The reduction, that would just be taxing what's deemed to be high-skilled workers from overseas. Now, they have to be high-skilled. You wouldn't get the visa. So the point being that not every worker pays Social Security or national insurance. There are conditions for exemption. The definitions are different, the boundaries of where charges apply. And of course, there's the international treaties where many people don't pay it. For example, I think the recent deal done with India, which was to help Indians come to the UK, part of that was they could continue to pay their Social Security in India and not have to pay UK Social Security, so UK national insurance. So they won't be subject to the 2% reduction, but they will be subject to the 2% extra hike on income tax. So at that level, it's starting to make a little bit more sense. But I think the vast majority of workers will just object. And I think it's political naivety.
Yeah.
Maybe political necessity, but political naivety as well.
So next point on the list is there's talks about bringing dividend tax in line with CGT. I think that's an unusual one because the risk and reward ratio for kind of, taking risk on investment fees, holding assets. It's just
this is a naive view. I think virtually every economist would tell you this is where you have a political, ideological view that very much the sort of Marx philosophy, that economic capital and making it from labour, you're exploiting the working class. That there shouldn't be anything like that. But if you take that to extreme, I don't think you have a very good society. But if they want to tax it, then I'm pretty sure that's what will happen, and people will work out ways to get around that tax. But as it stands, it's starting to kill entrepreneurialism, and without that, we can't grow the economy, we can't employ more people.
And do you think this is one of sort of last nails in the coffin? I joked about people running for the hills or running to Dubai, for example. Do you think this is one of those sort of last nails in the coffin that might just, you see a mass
I don't think so. I don't think this will be the one that does it, because you're basically saying there's no benefit to owning your own business. But if you look at your own business as basically being a job, then you're just as well off. So you run a business, you got, 50 people working for you. You get a benefit from running that business and putting in risk capital. And really what you're saying is you bought yourself a job. So you've got the responsibility of paying 49 other people. And you bought yourself a job. Yep. Now, you might get some capital appreciation if you run your business well. You might get some profit out of selling, some capital gain, but you bought yourself a job. So I think there is an awful lot of that entrepreneurial spirit will be killed. As you can probably gather from the accent, I come from Scotland. When the Scottish Parliament...
No, you don't.
I do. Proud Scotsman. And when the Scottish Parliament came in, you saw a huge shift. One of the first mega millionaires was Carnegie, a Scotsman, full of entrepreneurial spirit. And when the Scottish Parliament came in, a lot of my connections, not all my connections, are getting some sort of money out of the state. And I don't mean benefits. It could be lawyers getting contracts from some public sector authority, a school, a hospital, the government, whatever. And that's the Scottish government has moved very much towards moving away from entrepreneurialism. It's easier to get your money. We're humans, we're lazy. We want to get something for nothing. We want to make life easier for ourselves. So if you're getting the same pay, there's no benefit to setting up and starting off. Why would you? So this is really the death nail of the small business setting up.
Yeah. And I think, if you take a snapshot of the UK and how many small businesses we have, and as an economy, what proportion of it is made up of these small businesses, I think there's quite a large amount. I've heard economists say that, the UK is made up of essentially small
Well,
business.
we were known to be a nation of greengrocers, was that not right? And greengrocers in those days were not large businesses like Tesco's. So I think we've got to accept that if this is coming through, we're going down very much the French model of large businesses.
Yep. I think with the way we've seen large businesses and the way they treat some of small businesses, not necessarily to be deliberately nasty, but just because they are that much bigger and they can demand lower prices, for example, from farmers or whatever it is. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I'm not sure.
Well, they have different agenda. They have different masters. So if you're the boss of 50 people, you probably know all 50. And if we're looking at getting towards Christmas, so you look at a Christmas party, 49 people could give you a hard time. But if you're a big business owned by pension schemes, floated in the stock market across the world businesses, then actually no one's going to, those 49 people are not going to moan at their boss because there's powers that be way above it. So you end up with different agendas. And I don't think it helps the individual local worker. Yeah. Now, there's a certain amount of security about working in a bigger firm. The worries about profitability and cash flow and all that will disappear, which the small businesses will always have. But, beyond that, I think you've got some decision-making factors that can affect you that you're not aware of, not control of, and actually, quite frankly, have no ability to predict. So you're beholden to a third-party unknown. While in an owner-managed business with smaller number of global employees or just local workers, you probably can read the writing on the wall if things go wrong. You can read when there's a promotion opportunity much easier, which allows you to plan your career better. But the big global business is the strategic decisions that you're not aware of. So I think this is not one that actually helps the working person in the private sector. I think in the public sector, probably doesn't matter so much.
Probably a more emotive one is the rumour that there'll be national insurance on rental income. I think landlords have been hit quite hard over the last few years. Borrowing costs have been really putting some of our property clients under pressure.
If you think of a property yields, say 6%, now that's a reasonable residential property. Commercial property is obviously
for any fees we're talking. Yeah.
This is just what the yield being the calculated amount of rent you get compared to the market value of that property. So 6% is healthy. Not over the top, certainly not on the low side, if anything slightly above average. But you think about even people have mortgaged 80% of that goes to mortgage payments at the top end. That leaves you with 20% of 6, which is 1.2%. You've got to probably pay round about 0.5% to 0.75% to your estate agents, and you've got insurance on top. So let's call that 0.75%. You're left with 0.45% off your property before you pay tax. Noting, of course, the tax is going to be based. You don't get full relief if you're a higher rate taxpayer on the mortgage interest that you've paid. So you are probably in the negatives without doing the maths already. And now you want to take national insurance. I presume it'll have to be based on the rent. I think this is not just the death knell of it. I think this will be a very quick destruction of the rental market, the private sector rental market.
When we say destruction, are we talking about there just being no landlords willing to hold property, or are we talking about rental prices going through the roof, or both?
Well, how will people react, I think, is the question. But I think you'll see a massive exodus. There's a difference between people not making money on an investment property that they've got and losing money. Every month it's costing them. So I think you'll see the market flooded. That will depress prices. At some point that will allow people to enter. Those that don't want to sell will have to hike the prices unless you're unmortgaged, in which case you can wear this a bit longer. But if you ever want to get a mortgage, you've got to revert it back to market prices and make sure you're making profits. So you're going to end up with a situation where people don't sell, and most people, you can't sell property quickly. They'll have mortgages. They've got what's called ERCs, early redemption penalties. So if they sell within a certain period, they have to pay a penalty to the mortgage company. So they'll look at that analysis and decide whether they should sell early or wait and cover the monthly loss that they're making. But you're going to start seeing people not being able to remortgage their properties. Because if you're making a cash loss every month, why would the bank want to lend to you? They'd have to look at whether you've got enough other income. So I think this is a terrible policy. I mean, the buy-to-let landlords have been bashed enough. I mean, it's
also not just even from the tax perspective, but from a landlord rights perspective. It's getting harder to do anything about non-payment of rent. It's getting harder to, left, right, and centre. I feel like landlords are just getting it in the neck almost.
It was good, easy, lazy money for some, and I'm sorry to use that language, but the tax legislation differentiates businesses into two types. One is the trading business, things that make things, do things, are active, and the other one is those that, they're passive businesses. They put their feet up and collect rent, for want of a better word.
Or sit on assets.
Or investment type businesses. The tax man favours the former, the trading business, and doesn't like the latter. And for many years, there's been reliefs that apply to trading businesses. What's happened is, rather than saying you, as a buy-to-let landlord, an investment-based business, you didn't get the reliefs, what they've actually said, now you'll actively pay more tax. So you've got one thing, wear and tear allowance has gone, mortgage interest relief is restricted, there's ATED tax on properties going into companies and other structures, there's all sorts of things going on, and national insurance on rent, I think, will just kill it. And of course, I think it's really hard to administer. So I'm not sure this will happen.
Also, I mean, this is a fairness point. I mean, we've always had different tax rates for companies vs individuals, but this is really only going to hit people who hold property in their own name.
That would be that's probably true.
Based on the rumours.
So again, the individual who's inherited a property, he's only got one property, somebody who's saved up, worked hard as they've managed to get one, they're going to suffer it. Those with portfolios quite often have incorporated their property into a company, and therefore this is not going to hit them if it applies in the way we expect national insurance to apply.
Next point is capital gains tax, and there's talks of that going up generally. There's talks of classic cars and wine falling off the exemption for CGT list. I don't know why wine and classic cars was ever CGT exempt, to be honest.
Well, there's two aspects to this, right? So is this going to raise money for the government? That's the first question. And in my view, the reason wine and classic cars are not subject to tax is they're not considered to be, on average, assets which will appreciate in value. So if you buy a bottle of wine for £10,000, there's no guarantee it's going to go up to 11. When you add on the fees, storage costs, everything else, it's likely to be you'll get 9 for it, or whatever the price is. So because of that, the taxman doesn't want to say it's subject to capital gains, because then those losses can be used against future capital gains on other assets. So you tend to find that the exemption from capital gains is very often because, on average, and I do say on average, not everyone, you're not expected to make a gain in the first place. So really, it's a tax raising power by not giving you relief. So I don't think they're going to say that this is going to go subject to tax. Wine, I don't think anything has changed in the last 30 years that makes me say wine is now suddenly an appreciating asset. And classic cars, if anything, they were classic 30 years ago. The chances are they're very classic now. I don't think they're going to in numbers that would make you think this is a good business model to buy these things, with a few exceptions.
Irrespective of where we think it should be exempt or not, on both of these assets, I think it's one of these things, one of these policies of the ones we're speaking about that has probably very little impact. I mean, what is the average sales of classic cars and wine that people make as an individual?
I think this is where the rumours are just go out of control. This is very much, those that have got wines and classic cars are probably not your typical label voter. So you can see how a rumour would get a little bit of fuel and heat behind it, but I just don't think this is going to happen. As to capital gains rates generally, when the rumour is that they're going to rise and possibly in line up to where income tax rates are, again, that hits speculation, and they might be better tightening up the definitions around when you can call something income versus capital. Again, the basis for that is if you have an asset which you sell, is that part of your business stock in trade that you're selling? All those widgets that you sell, you've manufactured. Well, you're selling widgets, but they're not capital gains. That's your profit. Or is that part of a capital appreciation and gain that you sold? So there's rules around that. And I think they could widen that definition to make more assets clearer in the income category unless in the capital gain category, without throwing the entire possibility of taxing all gains at the same rate. If we end up with a tax regime which says whatever you get of income, however you get it, you're taxed as if you're an employee, and whatever you speculate in, you get taxed as if you're an employee, then the reality is most people are going to be employees, if not everyone's an employee. And if everyone's an employee, you don't have anybody speculating, you don't have any risk. We're all working for the public sector. So we need to keep that ability to take some element of risk. And to do that, you need some sort of reward.
And a slightly more technical one is the removal of uplift on death in respect of CGT.
I was told, what's the best, there's an exam question, and this was a lecturer talking, what's the best way to avoid capital gains? And he was marking the paper, and someone said death. And he said, that is right, but you can't get a mark for recommending somebody dies. So that was the sort of the typical accountant joke. But so you've got this concept where on death, your assets are all revalued to market value. And therefore, when somebody inherits the asset, they inherit it, and if they sell it, they only pay gains from that level. But in practice, it may be hard to work out what that market value is, so it's tied into the probate figures. But market value at date of death, while maybe uncertain, is actually fathomable. It can be identified and ascertained. But if you say it depends on somebody when somebody bought it, let's look through a scenario where we've got 3 or 4 people dying every 10 years. So you've got 50 years down the journey, and we have to work out when that original person bought it. We don't have the records for that. So you're going to end up with a really complicated situation. And I just don't think that's workable in practice. It throws up an awful lot of anomalies. It might sort out a small anomaly where husband and wife who generally operated together, one can uplift the assets to the other. So there's often a bit of tax planning around ill health between couples around that sort of thing. But fundamentally, I think you're easier to sort out those anomalies than they are to do something as draconian as remove that uplift on death. And I'd like to think that the scrutiny of any sort of budget bill would identify that and kick that into touch.
I agree. I think HMRC are kind of under-resourced at the moment. They don't need something this complex to have to run around, challenging people about, only to be told they don't have the support for when they bought whichever asset we're talking about.
I mean, you can just see, it's just madness.
Yeah. It'd be really hard to actually take that one forward. Moving on to inheritance tax now. Speculation of the lifetime gifting cap. So, i.e., I can only give my grandchildren, for example, X amount before I die across my life or something like that.
So this is an interesting concept. Inheritance tax is actually a tax on lifetime gifts, with your last gift deemed on death.
Yeah. Which is
when you go down to the pub, and because I'm a tight Scotsman, when you go down to the pub and buy me a beer, you've technically given me a lifetime gift. Now, if we have a lifetime cap, are you going to cap the number of pints you're going to buy me? Certainly hope not. And that's the problem with it. There are so many reliefs and exemptions just to make the tax manageable from an administrative perspective. Unless we want to have the nanny state where every transaction is logged and who bought it and who it was given to, some sort of digital system, which is probably doable in the current world. But unless we want to go down that route, I think this is impossible. You cannot do a lifetime gift. You have to time bound it. So what we've currently got is it's unlimited, but it's in only this time frame.
Yeah.
And then we can work out what that is. And if you've got exemptions for gift out of regular income, so we don't need to calculate the number of pints you've bought me or not, and so on. So I think it would be quite hard to ask people to keep a note of the gifts they make for lifetime and cap it, because how do you track what was given 30 years ago?
Also for your kids, I mean, say you have a child, and I think the rough cost of raising a child is something like £500,000 from the age of 0 to the age of 18 or whatever. You can include all the clothes you bought and all this.
Well, if you buy them out of income...
Where do you stop the silliness?
Well, if you buy them out of income, you don't need to. So if you inherited money and then you gave that to your children and you bought your clothes and you gave it to them, then you've got a debate there. And this is the problem. Inheritance tax is not a tax well liked. To make it more burdensome at that point in time of death when people are emotionally fragile, I think is a really bad political move.
Yeah, agreed. Keeping with inheritance tax, there's talks about taper relief and it being removed. I mean, should we talk about what taper relief is?
Yeah,
first
so
off?
you've got a concept currently in inheritance tax where if you gift to somebody some money or an asset and you survive 7 years and you're not currently continuing to benefit from that asset, then it's called a PET, a potentially exempt transfer, which falls out your estate. So it's potentially exempt because you have to live 7 years. But if you do live 7 years, it is exempt. The issue is why taper relief? It's only what happens between the date of the gift and that 7 year. It starts to taper. So you have to live 3 years, 3 full years, and then it starts to reduce.
Yeah.
At 20% a year till you get to the 100% at the end of year 7.
So and it's 20% of the IHT you would have otherwise paid, right?
20%, yeah. So if you remove that tapering, then you're really removing you have to live a full 7 years.
Yeah, it's just a 7 year cut
I think most people who are giving gifts aren't planning on living 3 years but not 7. So I don't think it's going to change behaviour. Will it raise money? Probably. Won't raise an awful lot. There'll be people that don't like it because of the concept of it.
And there'll be people that don't like it because they just happen to have got a terminal condition for whatever reason. They're given a gift with the hope that they might reach 7 years, but they only reach 3 or 4. And they then miss out, essentially.
I mean, unfortunately, that's the issue with it now. You're still rolling that dice. All that's happened is they increase the length of time you got to live. I think it's a political decision. Anything like that is not going to be popular, but I think that's one they can probably get away with. Most people aren't relying on the taper relief as part of their estate planning. It's a useful tool. It often makes it beneficial to do because you only have to live 3 years to see some benefit. But I don't think it's the thing that pushes most people over the line. So I think they can get away with that one.
The next one, still with IHT, is talking about the nil rate band and it being frozen until 2030. This is not dissimilar to the first one we started with, which is essentially fiscal drag again,
This is very much fiscal drag on the inheritance side.
Yeah.
325,000 has been there for a while.
Yeah.
And I suspect it's going to continue there for a while. There's no real driver to increase it. It will make an awful lot more estates come into inheritance tax. I think, again, it will be one that's just easy to do politically.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they'll do.
I mean, if we look ahead 5 years' time, 2030, this might, be frozen until property prices, for example. That's normally people's biggest asset when they pass. That's likely to move quite a lot in 5 years. The amount of tax that they could collect
the issue
in 5 years' time would
be
be
for the voter if they have to sell the family home because it's now brought them into inheritance tax.
Yeah.
They might not have the liquid assets. They don't want to sell the family home and they're forced to. That normally is what drives an increase in this nil rate band. It's what drove the last Tory government to put in the additional residence nil rate band, where if you left your home to a descendant, you got another £175,000, which brought you up to 500,000 in total as your tax-free amount for inheritance tax. With a partner, that brought you up to £1 million, which was considered politically acceptable. So I think it'll be how property prices grow that'll drive that, where they go. If we are looking at what they're going to do with the buy-to-let landlords and hitting that property sector quite hard so the prices fall, they probably don't need to raise this nil rate band. They can probably let that run. I think this is politically, it's not suicide for them.
I think you're right. I mean, anything that's fiscal drag is a sneaky tax. We've already said that. Well, at least that's the word I wanted to use. Maybe
that was the word you used, yes.
But it is one of those ones you can get away with it. I think as a government, so not a bad one for them to go for when they've got such a black hole to fill. Moving on then to one we've already touched on, which was mansion tax. We've talked. I think I must have heard at least 2 different thresholds. One was 2 million, one was 800k. I didn't think 800k would get you a mansion these days, but
I think I've heard we're looking at 1.5. That's what the analysis I've heard.
Right.
But I think they're going to do it with a number of properties, either 100 or 300,000. I've heard different numbers. And it's looking at, say, a sum of £4,000. So if you've got 100,000 people paying £4,000, I mean, we've got a £50 billion deficit. It's a drop in the ocean.
Yeah.
So you're going to create all this angst for not enough money.
It's like you're pissing people off for this little fraction.
And yes, it's a very similar method to ATED. For those that don't know what ATED is, annual tax on enveloped dwellings. To put it short, when you own a property in a company, which was a bit of tax planning for example, the oligarchs in the past to avoid various taxes. That's now decided to be a tax specifically on that. And the highest end, the £20 million property, you're paying over £200,000 a year for the privilege of having that property owned in a company. Ouch, is all I can say. So, £4,000, doesn't sound like the biggest scheme on it for £100,000, 100,000 people. But it's £4,000 they didn't have to pay. How does it come? I suspect they can probably pay for it. So I think it's not a very good tax, because you've got to revalue all the properties. You've got to, maybe need to be done anyway, but you can't have some properties revalued and others not. So you're starting on a journey. Yes, you may value the more expensive ones first, but you're going to have to start then valuing the marginal ones, because some of them will get into that property threshold. But I think there's a couple of challenges on the implementation of this.
I think also when you're looking at it and you're saying £4 grand, 100,000 properties, whatever. So we're talking about £400 million. It sounds like a lot of money, but like we've said, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a lot. You're just kind of rubbing people up the wrong way and not even raising that much for it. But not only that, that's just the income level. The implementation level, you've just mentioned the implementation being tricky. The cost of implementing it is going to be considerable. It's not going to be easy. We've never had a mansion tax before. It's not just going to be easy to roll out. They're going to have to get consultants in, probably get some IT development, whatever it is.
Well, I heard that it's going to be done through your income tax. You'll self-declare, which is just madness, because the properties that are hardest to value are the ones that, that have the least number of transactions. So, the UK property market works very much like other property market comparables. This house is similar to this other one, with maybe a few changes here and there that I can make adjustments for, whether that's size, whether that's location, whether that's, how, nicely done up it is, etc. You're looking at comparables. So those at the wealthier end of the property spectrum tend to have bespoke houses. So you've created this thing where, how do you value it? You've got the wealthy, presumably if you've got the wealthy property, you're going to be in the wealthy income tax bracket as well, having to self-declare their properties. They'll be paying for advisors to do so because they can afford to, and that's what they'll do, and that will mean it's very hard for HMRC to challenge. And the latest I heard was if it was done by a third party, they wouldn't be challenging it. But it's you're putting an awful lot of onus now on an individual to assess his property, which, much though he probably thinks is very valuable, he could just as easily make an argument and say, no one's going to buy this. I need to sell it quickly, because the mansion tax says what's it worth today, not what's it worth if I had a 6-month period of selling it and marketing it and I could negotiate the prices, whatever. There'll be a method of doing it. Normally it's market value. If you did mortgages, you'd know that different ways of doing market value. So how do you work out what that market value is? Well, in a subjective master, you're just creating uncertainty. I think this is a disaster waiting to happen. It has been confirmed. Saying that, there have been other taxes confirmed by this government. So it is still a rumour, but probably a stronger rumour than some. But I think it's fraught with challenges.
What's interesting to me is not just how much money are we going to raise and how hard is it going to implement and all this other stuff, is it good or bad, but also the other impacts. Someone who's just below the 1.5 million threshold that you've just spoken about, thinking about doing an extension, or was thinking about doing an extension, or maybe a big kitchen refit, is now thinking, well, why would I bother? Because that's going to put me into this next bracket. And I feel like that trickle-down effect to tradesmen and businesses that sell kitchens, or B&Q and Wix and all the others, everything has a knock-on effect, doesn't it?
I think that's right. I mean, this is a tax, because it's market value based, is going to look at, if you've done the extension, you're going to be paying more tax. Well, the advantage of the current council tax system, and let's be clear, it's a flawed system, but it goes back to 1991. So the impact of your new kitchen investment isn't the same, because prices were less. So you're less likely to hit those thresholds in the same way. I think the mansion tax is coming in. I think it's set to start hitting very few people. So it's not going to be a major political disaster. It's probably hitting more the right side of the political spectrum. So the Tories or the Reform Party. Labour aren't really got a lot to lose with this. The worry for Middle Britain is that it starts at a certain level as a mansion tax, and then the definition of mansion tax is the ordinary man. So if this budget doesn't solve the problems, and I'm sure it'll be portrayed as a budget solving the economic miracle, but if it doesn't turn out to be that, then there will be political pressure to reduce the definition of a mansion tax.
I think what's more likely than them dropping the threshold is for just over the next 5-10 years, if we, end up keeping some sort of left-wing government over time, whether that's Labour or whether it ends up being Green Party or whoever, I can imagine the fiscal drag element of that just dragging more and more and more properties in, and it wouldn't be hard for that to happen. So next one is a salary sacrifice cap. So reducing the amount that you can give up in exchange for things like benefits, things like putting more into your pension scheme.
This is just noise. This is just absolute pointless. If you were offering somebody a pay rise, they haven't got the pay rise, let's be absolutely clear, and they said, I'd rather put more money into my pension, I'd rather do this. That's not a salary sacrifice. They haven't got the salary increase. This is only for someone who says, I now have a bigger salary, I don't want to have it anymore. Can I exchange it for something else? So the number of people this is going to apply to is minuscule. It literally will only be the existing people on a salary sacrifice. So you might as well just say all we're doing is abolishing salary sacrifice for pension schemes. It's not a big tax earner. It's going to just piss everybody off for very little benefit. I think this is just political noise to try and make it look as if it's really important.
And there's not many wins you can make as a salaried staff member. I think, like you said, this is nickeling and diming, isn't it? I mean, when largely your income is so defined in the way it's going to be taxed as a salaried staff member, these tiny little wins that someone could make a bit extra here and a bit extra there. I mean, is this sad? It feels.
The question is, how do you work out what salary sacrifice is? Well, you're not allowed to give up your salary. Well, they haven't been given a salary. Well, you can't talk about them and then not give it to them. You have some sort of wider definition, with some sort of foresight of what salary might be. Well, you say, no, we were just talking randomly. We weren't. How do you fix it so that you raise this tax?
Yeah.
I think it's.
And are you allowed to offer them a new job that has just a completely different remuneration package?
Yes. So I think this is going to be, the tax advisor's dream, quite frankly, going around and advising, presumably larger employers who can afford the fees, but, on how to reward their employees. This is more rhetoric than substance.
Well, we'll leave that one there then, especially because it's not a big earner. But moving on to pensions now, with the tax-free lump sum of 25% after you're 55, you can take a lump sum of 25%. We're talking about revoking that completely. I think that feels harsh to me because lots of people plan for that.
It's hard. So if I'm an IFA, as you know, an independent financial advisor as well as a tax advisor, and I often have to deal with pension technical matters. And the pension legislation is incredibly complex. Successive governments have changed pensions, but they always keep the old pensions there because people have planned for it. Okay, so you can't rip up someone's retirement plan, 35 years into a 40-year plan. It's just not fair on them. So you've got all these old schemes that are still available. So what are they going to do here? Are they really going to sit there and get rid of the pre-commencement lump sum? Or are they just going to be for new people into the workforce? So you'll find that you can't add any more money into your pension scheme. There's going to be a new pension scheme that isn't eligible for the pre-commencement lump sum. I think that would have to be how it's done. You have to preserve what's earned and then tell people we don't take away what your plan was, but you have to adjust for the future because now you don't get that benefit.
I think with Labour though, and they'll have the data on who's voting for them more than anyone else will, but I think pensioners or people who are approaching pension age tend to be a little bit more right and therefore are they just pissing off people that essentially aren't going to vote for them anyway? And is that therefore a good money earner for Labour?
No, certainly it's possible. There's certainly those who've got final salary schemes or defined benefit schemes, those schemes that pay out as a percentage of how long they've worked with their employer and what they were earning. Those schemes are running hardly any left. I think the MPs are one of the last ones. But those schemes won't be affected because they tend not to get the right to take a lump sum. Or if they do, they're often not encouraged to, because they've got this guarantee. But the private sector and those that with money purchase or defined contribution schemes where the risk of investment performance sits with the individual and not the employer, those schemes are quite useful. It's quite an attractive feature to get 25% tax-free lump sum. So they're going to be hit. I'm not sure I would say that's skewing a left or a right mix in a political spectrum. I think what's more interesting is if you're advising someone to go into a pension, you say, look, you get tax relief on the way in. The question often is, what happens on the way out? And they go, well, you get taxed on the way out. Three things relevant. One, you are probably earning less on retirement than you were when you were working. Therefore, you might be in a lower tax bracket. Where you earned at the 40% bracket, you might retire in the 20% tax bracket.
Highly probable.
Yep. So therefore, you're going to get a tax saving because you get taxed at the rate that your tax you pay when you take it out.
Yeah. Not
at the rate that you should have had when you took the relief and you put it in. Second point being that it's growing. Your pension is growing tax-free. So they're all the positives.
And that's a compounding impact.
That's the compounding impact. And then the client says, she said, well, I turned 40, I'm a 40% taxpayer and I expect to be a 40% pension taxpayer. Why should I put into pension? Other than growth, your guess is as good as mine as to whether the stock market will go up. So I've got to ignore that. Why should I invest with you? And then you've got but you get 25% tax-free lump sum when you withdraw it. Your pre-commencement lump sum. So that takes your 40% tax on your pension when you take the money out. 25% of that is tax-free. So now you're going to pay an effective rate of 30%. Plus you get tax-free growth if it grows. If you remove that incentive, the only benefit to a pension is tax-free growth.
Hang on. I mean, fair dues on the sort of income tax side of things. I mean, there was a point at which pensions were the holy grail for passing stuff down from an inheritance tax perspective. That's not as good as it was now.
But I think that's fair. I think, the government puts in rules around tax legislation and behaviour. And the rest of the world reacts to that and tries to make it suit them. So there was put in place, I think it was around 2006, 2008, where you got this relief on inheritance tax for your pension. And lo and behold, people started using it as an inheritance tax vehicle. But let's be clear, pensions are designed for people's retirement. Perfect pension scheme from the government is when you spend your last pound of your pension scheme the day you die. So that's what pension relief should be giving, retirement planning. If they want to come up with an inheritance tax scheme, then create one. But putting the two together allows people to take advantage of the rules. Pretend it's one thing when really it's another. So I actually don't have a problem with that. The question is, should you then be creating another relief for inheritance tax?
I mean, sticking with pensions, there's talking about a sort of flattening of the relief you get for putting into the pension in the first place, bringing it to 25 to 30% relief for sort of everyone, regardless of your tax bracket.
So let's say you're a higher rate taxpayer. You want to retire on a higher rate. You want to retire as close as you can to your current earnings, and you don't believe you're going to be able to live on less. Right? The general view is people, when they retire, expect to be able to live on what they were, even though they know reality is their cost of living is probably going to be less over time. So if you can put money in and get 30% tax relief, that sounds great. But then to find that you pay 40% when you take it out, that's not good. Right? So you've created a disincentive to do a pension scheme. Now, actually, I don't have a problem with that. If the government needs to raise money, pension scheme gives tax relief now. It reduces the tax take now and defers it for some point in the future when they take that money. The government needs money now, so maybe remove the tax relief. It will hit people's retirement, but you've got a generation to work out how to deal with that. And if the governments, successive governments, it won't just be this Labour government, etc., can use that tax money wisely, then maybe that's a good answer.
Yeah.
They fritter it away, then clearly it'd be better incentivizing pension schemes, pension investments.
No, I agree. I mean, often talked about which generation pays when there's the problem. And this sort of just,
COVID was madness.
Collecting now, but possibly creating an issue for the future. But
Well, COVID was utter madness in that respect. The younger generation, for a culture, the European culture or Western culture where the elder population try and look after the younger generation. So we're not a Oriental culture where it's the other way around. Okay? With COVID, we borrowed huge sums of money with the view that it was going to protect the elderly from the risk of COVID. And the generation that pays is the younger generation who've got to be burdened with the debt that's got to be repaid. So I think it's a very unusual policy that Rishi Sunak put in place, one that we've got to live with for generations to come.
I mean, that could be its own podcast.
Oh, yes.
whether COVID was dealt with appropriately. But I think people are over it now. Moving on to another rumour, which I think speaks to issues you've already spoken about with regards to the mansions tax, which is a reform with council tax and it being based on a valuation of properties. I don't know if that means everyone needs to get a valuation on their property en masse, or whether, each year you're going to have to get it valued because it could change.
Well, I think they'll do it like rates. They'll be updated. There'll be regular updates. They'll pick 2025 as a year and every property has to be updated to 2025. This is all fine. Rebasing it doesn't change things. It's only relevant in two scenarios. One, where somebody's property has grown more or less than the average. So they're moving up or down differently to the average person.
It's been developed.
A development area, whatever. And the other issue is if they actually change the rate at which you're going to pay. If you increase something let's say you're paying 1% on £100, and then you say, right, it's now going to be based on £200, but you only have to pay 0.5%, it doesn't change what people pay. It makes it easier to understand because you're basing on current prices at £200, but you're still paying the same tax.
I mean, let's face it, that is definitely not what's going to happen.
I don't think that'll be what happens. So I think it'll be the same rate at a higher rates.
Yeah.
We are talking about property uplift from 1991. I mean,
Enormous.
that's 34 years.
Did you own a house back then?
No.
What was the first?
I was 96.
96 was the first property you bought.
Yeah.
How much was it worth?
Were you born?
I was born, but in 91.
Yeah, so you were just born.
In 96, how much was your property worth and how big was it?
I bought a one-bed flat in a nice area of Glasgow with a pension that I actually got from my father's death. I bought it for, I think, 78,000. It's a Victorian one-bed flat. Really, two-bed, really.
What do we reckon that is now worth?
I think it's over 200,000. I don't know, but I think it's over 200,000.
Yeah, I mean, you don't live up there, so you probably don't know we should go and find out, shouldn't we, and see what we think might happen to
But if that was the right, let's say those numbers are right, and let's say it is 200, not over 200,000.
Let's say it's 250 now, yeah?
Okay, let's say it's 250. So we're looking at an increase from 70, call it 75, 250. That's 3 times, right? 3% increase. So your council tax.
Actually, more like closer to.
Yeah, that's going to be higher, yeah. But you're looking at, no, it's less than 3 times, but you're paying a council tax. If the rate stays the same, the rate of council tax stays the same per pound of value, you're looking at an astronomical increase. Now, I think the councils need more money. I think in 2008, when effectively austerity started due to financial mismanagement of the economy, you had the council were awash with cash. There'll be lots of people denying that, right? But the fact they've managed to suffer 16 years of successive cuts without any reduction in their obligation, if not increases in their obligation, tells you that surely at the start of that journey, they probably have a little bit more cash than they need. But I think the scale, certainly in England, the scale of councils that have gone into financial trouble recently tells you they've gone too far. So if this council uplifting is going into local authorities, then I think we're going to see an improvement in local public services. I can't imagine that central government is thinking that. I mean, there might be some little bone chucked to them, but I think really this is looking at central government money raising. So I'm not sure how they're going to do this because council tax goes to local authorities, and that'll be quite a big shift if it doesn't.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting to watch. And similarly, when we were talking about the mansion tax and how we think the implementation of that's going to be really tricky and probably quite expensive, I think the upheaval of going through the process of getting current valuations that are meaningful is just going to be quite an insane task.
I think you've got to bear in mind, we're also at a time when the tax system in terms of processing is going to go through some radical changes from April. We're making tax digital, which means self-employed, those earning over a certain threshold, we're doing quarterly tax returns. So that's property owners, self-employed. And that's a huge administrative burden which they don't have to do currently. And from all accounts, the HMRC's software development is not up to scratch, and they're behind the curve, and they're struggling to keep up and making it work. And then you're throwing on new taxes with complicated regimes that haven't really been thought through. I think you've got a recipe for a real disaster.
I can just see it being so operationally difficult that it almost grinds to a halt and nothing happens almost.
I mean, we've already got HMRC accusations that they're not really open and public facing. You can't get phone calls to them. They take a year to respond to letters. And how do you expect the public to respect an organisation like that when it's in control of so much money and collecting so much revenue? It's unfair on the public. And I think what you'll happen, if the announcements do come in as we've been discussing, I don't think they'll come in for April. I think there'll be some analysis done in HMRC that has gone back up to Rachel Reeves and our colleagues and said, we can't do this. There's no way we can make such radical changes. If you want to freeze allowances, increase the rate of income tax, it's the same calculation with a different rate. We can do that, but don't do any more, please.
Yeah, it's going to be a tricky one. The next one on the list is about VAT thresholds and those going down. So that's currently at 90k, and the deregistration limit is something like 85k now. There's talks of it going down to 30k, as in being forced to register for VAT as at 30k. I don't know if that'll be the final threshold, or this is still a rumour, obviously.
I'm a little bit unsure about this one. I'm not sure it's going to have a massive political backlash. There will definitely be some businesses that are forced to close, okay? So I don't think it's helping the working person. I think the main businesses that close are those that are doing public good. Those organisations that are selling things almost at charitable levels to support a community. We're getting to level 30,000 of revenue. For some of these organisations, actually isn't that high. Yeah,
you could end up bringing something like, I don't know, a tennis club in to VAT thresholds, and they're just trying to sell something to help kids for sport or something, you know. Yeah, it's at that kind of micro level, isn't it, that's kind of impacting society.
Yeah, and I think this has got a bit backfiring, but I think politically they'll get away with it.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, I was speaking to my plumber about this specific policy that might change, and he was saying, well, he's VAT registered anyway, so it's not going to impact him. You know, it kind of, he sees it as evening out the playing field a little bit, where he might have a part-time plumber that he's pitching against on some quote, and now because they're having to add VAT on top, where might have not done before, and they might have won the work almost every time that he was pitching against. He's in the running now. So.
Well, I'd be telling the part-time plumber that he needs to separate out his charges, so he's acting as a clear agent for the materials and as a principal for the labour, and try and separate out to keep your VAT below the threshold.
I mean, there's people that do that, yeah.
As long as it's done legitimately and you need to take advice on it. But the more you make people pay tax, the more people seek to try and get out of it and get around it. So long as that's done legitimately, that's okay.
Right, moving on. There's talks about changing business rates. I don't know if we've got enough detail to talk about it dramatically, but I think small businesses which are hit by business rates the most are probably already struggling and don't need any more pile on top of them.
Well, I think look, it depends how this is done. I don't have a massive problem with paying additional rates for a business. I can get it. But if you're saying it's going to affect the high street, and I had read there was going to be some sort of exemption around the high street, but if you hit the high street, then you're just knocking it as an area, a community, you know, the centre of that community, even harder.
It's already on its knees.
Yeah, you've got to sit there and at some point see common sense. And I think the rates there is relief for certain bits of rates, but with councils struggling economically, they've been less willing to use their discretion on those. And then you get the other side of it, the actual relief for a small business is fairly small, a few thousand a year compared with, you know, what could be all clawed back with the rate increase.
I agree with you. If we can keep the high street alive, make sure they're not impacted by that, I think that'd be a big plus. So moving back onto VAT, just because that's the way AI has laid it out for me. Talks about reducing the amount of markets or industries, where zero rated or exempt VAT applies. I'm not sure if we have a list specifically on which sort of sectors.
Schedule 8 and 9 services. So goods. Look, this makes sense. So the best way of running an economy is to have a broad tax base and not take a lot from everyone, so people don't feel it. So removing the relief from VAT broadens that tax base. The challenge of it is the social view. So that's the economic argument. The social view says, but it's not fair. I shouldn't pay VAT on tampons, baby food, whatever it is, right? And there is a social argument that says that. So if you want to remove those exemptions and zero rating, that can be done, but it comes at an issue of social justice. And so the Labour Party will have to sit there and explain that to its voters, because it's probably more its voter base that will be affected by that than others.
Yeah, I mean, it's just going to increase the cost of goods, and obviously people at the lower end of the pay scale are going to feel that the most.
But let's be here. Why are we broadening the rate? Why are we broadening the base? We're broadening the base because they don't want to break an election pledge to increase the rate. So what we've got is the political promise is more important than their political heart, their voters, their political heartland. And I think there's something wrong when that's what happens. There's plenty of opportunity for them to say, we didn't know about this, we were misled, it's not our fault. We've made these promises in the manifesto, we really believed them, but we can't adhere to them. And I think hitting the single mother with baby food and tampons and nappies and that and all those, it just seems to me to be unfair.
It feels harsh. Yeah, it feels harsh. Whether it's right or wrong from an economic perspective, I think, yeah, it's hard to justify it to the public.
I mean, I think when you look at VAT and school fees, there was a social argument. It wasn't a particularly sensible one when you think it through, because it's going to cost them revenue, it's not going to generate them revenue. But when you actually see it, you can see an argument that says, you know what,
this is a luxury,
on the base, it's a luxury, therefore we're going to tax it, right? The problem is very often that when they look at how people react to tax, that's where you see the problem.
Yeah, and the government didn't sort of see what might come as a result of that. You know, all the private schools have been sort of in the headlines for reclaiming VAT on all the capital costs for many years gone by. There was some private schools that really got on top of things and arranged for parents to bill many years in advance.
Well, that's not been permitted, but there's anti-avoidance on that. But yeah, there's some rules against that. But the bottom line is your CapEx. You know, all these private schools that have got their luxuries, they've got luxury gyms, theatres, whatever, new classrooms. They get all that VAT back. So that's just the truth. You've then got the influx of people saying, the marginal person that can't afford it has to go to the state sector. Well, I'd like to think the state sector can afford it. I'm not sure they can.
Yeah, that's the problem. And something that's not been talked about enough, actually, in respect of that decision. So sort of not how much money's been made or how much money's not been made, but how many kids are being sent to private school overseas, like Switzerland or...
Well, the UK used to export its expertise in education. It had a great reputation, and one hopes that can continue. But from what I can hear, what I've seen, I think that's a jeopardy now.
Yeah. Anyway, that's not even in the budget.
No, that was last budget.
That was last budget, but still one that people talk about. So, still on VAT on ride-sharing platforms is now going to sort of be imposed, where apparently it wasn't before, which I wasn't aware of on this. So places like businesses like Uber, Bolt, to name a few.
So there's been a couple of tax cases around VAT on this. That Bolt's done one. Uber's trying to get a big repayment for VAT. So they've been charging VAT, and now they're saying they shouldn't be charging VAT. That's not a budget issue. That's a court interpretation issue. So there's something called TOPS. TOPS is the VAT mechanism, which stops you paying full VAT in your holiday. You only pay it on the margin that's being generated. And what they're arguing is that a taxi ride is like a journey, like a holiday journey, transport. So the TOPS scheme applies. Therefore, the VAT that's been applied to these journeys is wrong. Very complicated calculation, but trying to say that you pay VAT on your margin, your gross margin, and not on your gross takings. So there's a change coming, and the HMRC have not conceded. So there's going to be another court round to see what happens. You know, it's TOPS scheme's a useful mechanism for those that are in certain industries to do with travel. You know, can it be used to reduce people's VAT costs? Particularly it's particularly relevant where you have an end consumer that can't recover the VAT. If the end consumer can recover the VAT, it doesn't matter. So if you're doing taxi journeys only to businesses, it doesn't matter. That business we're normally able to recover the VAT.
Is there an argument that if it's to a business, it should be normal VAT, and if it's to a person, it might be?
Well, I think there certainly is that argument, but the challenge is, how do you work it out?
There's a toggle, personal to business on Uber at least. Anyway, yeah. So next one on Rumours is a pay per mile for EVs road tax.
Well, it feels a little bit unfair, but I think there's logic to it. It's unfair because you've asked people to move to EVs at a huge cost. Let's be clear. A new car is not a cheap car, and an EV is not a cheap car, at the higher end of that. And, when you haven't got a government that hasn't put in place the charging infrastructure, you've removed the subsidy of doing it, and the uptake has been good but not fantastic. But the government's feeling the pain, the loss of road tax, the loss of things, and rather than reversing
And
duty on fuel, which I suppose is the big one, what are they doing? They're going to charge it per mile. I'm actually in massive favour of that. It's a discretionary cost, as I call it. I mean, some people say you have to drive, it's not discretionary, but you can choose not to. You can choose to work from home, you can choose to take a bus, you can choose to walk, you can do things. So in that sense, it is discretionary. So I think we, as a society, we would be much happier if we didn't feel money was taken from our pay packet and we had the choice to buy things, and buying them or consuming them cost us more.
Yeah, I mean, we like to think that you pay, for example, car tax, and that goes towards maintaining roads. I don't think that's how it works. I think it all goes to one big pot, to be honest. But
that goes to central government, local government repair the roads, so it definitely doesn't go.
But I think the sort of pay per mile concept isn't a bad way of doing it, as long as it's, replacing that. So say we replaced all car tax with a pay per mile road tax instead. I think, for the sort of, say, pensioner who barely goes out and has just like a tiny little, whatever it is, Nissan Micra or something to go to the shops and back, and barely does any miles, I think they should be paying less road tax because of they're only going there or there.
The reason I think is applying to the EVs and not the other cars is because EVs are heavy. But that's because of the philosophy that to get my car to do an acceptable amount of range, I have to have a bigger battery. Batteries are heavy.
How do you reckon we're going to track how many miles people do? Or there's going to be a self-declaration list?
No, so they do it in America. In Houston, where we've got family, they have a sticker on the windscreen. And they've got cameras that can read that sticker and charge you automatically.
Fantastic.
It's going to need investment. And if the government's going to do that investment, it needs to award a contract to people that are going to firms that are going to pay tax in the UK. But it might also be worth being a little bit more radical. I think we should stop driving on the left-hand side, start driving on the right. It's a radical move, but it means that we will get access to cheaper cars long-term. And on the basis we're not a country that makes cars, but it's keeping more money in this country long-term. I'm not sure when you think about it, it's that big a cost. Turning the signs around the other way, the roundabout, so you go the other direction, you pick it up, flip it over, points that direction. I think there will no doubt be some works, but if you announced it and said 2030, this is going to be the case, I think people can adjust, people can adapt. There's certainly cars that are meant to be more energy efficient, more cheaper that aren't coming into this country because they can't. It's not economically viable to produce a left-hand drive when they've got to focus on the right-hand drive.
Yeah, the amount of cars I see that I'd love to buy, but they're not coming here because of that.
Yeah, and if the government said, look, we'll do this change, but we're going to keep the money in the UK, all the money must be declared for UK tax, then I can see an argument that says, you know what, we've just boosted UK economic growth and we've solved what may at the time have been a sensible idea to drive on the left, but we've lost that battle. Let's just accept it and move on.
Yeah. Interesting, but very, very big move to do that. But like you say, for the long term, it could be really beneficial. Moving on to energy levies, possible reduction in energy levies.
Yeah,
I think energy has been a bit of an emotive topic.
So this is an interesting one. This is where the current bill that you get from your electricity company and your energy company, it allows for a certain amount of green generation. So all these electricity and gas companies, they have to do a certain amount of green initiatives. That's costing them. So the cost of that gets spread onto the bills. And that's a regulatory requirement. So if that was removed, then they could pass that saving on to the consumers. But most times that people talk about passing things on to the consumers, they don't. So if you signed up to a contract to pay, p a kilowatt hour for your electricity, and they remove this, you've got a contract that says you're paying 30p an hour, per kilowatt hour. What do you think they're going to bill you? P a kilowatt hour. They're not going to turn around and say, but we've reduced this obligation now. We're going to only charge you 28p per kilowatt hour. They're going to bill you to 30. So this is not going to end up in the consumer's or the taxpayer's pocket. This is a reduction in obligation is going to benefit large company PLC, not hardworking individuals, not taxpayers from the left or the right spectrum. This is not sensible. And if you do believe there is a green agenda and that we've got environmental climate change concerns, then you need to put this in and maybe you need to drive it further.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, obviously, anything that impacts a large corporate that ultimately sells B2C does impact individuals.
Yep.
So anyway, moving off of that and onto the next point, removal of the two child benefit cap. What do we think about that? That's families now we're talking about.
Well, in a time when we're struggling, should we be paying people to have more children? I'm not sure we should. We need to cut our costs. This is going to increase it. Having children, as we can see around the world, because the birth rates are widely differing based on societies around the world, it's a choice.
Yeah.
So should we as a society be encouraging more than 2 children? That's the question. And, I'm probably not well enough qualified but from the snippets that I can see, and again, putting my own biases and perspective and things, I'm not in favour of this. I don't think the country can afford it.
Yeah, well, I think there's countries out there that appear in the news quite regularly, China, Japan, who have a unbelievably low birth rate, and it's impacting their economy quite dramatically. I mean, I don't think we're anywhere near that as a country, although it is dropping apparently.
We don't. So the economic theory of the last several hundred years is you need labour to grow. So you have immigration, you get people more productive, you work. But we're now in the era coming in of robotics, where you don't need labour to grow. You'll be able to grow economies by thinking how to do things, and the computers and machines and robots will do it for you. So I'm not, and of course, when you're having a child, I think it's a 70, 80, 90, maybe 120 by that time decision. So we're definitely going to be looking at a robotic world at this point. Are we investing in something that's going to benefit our economy, benefit our well-being? No. In the past, that was definitely the case. The more labour you had, the more people could be productive. People that went down the coal mines, extracted the coal, went on the ships, did whatever they needed to do. But in a world where the robot does it for you, what we're going to have is more idle people that have to be fed. So I think it's a costly measure that has a huge amount of negative impact long term. And I know that's probably socially unacceptable viewpoint, but I think it's the economic one.
And yeah, that's an interesting one. Weirdly, back to EVs again.
EV.
I might have to rejig these later, which is fine. I can do that. So on one hand, she's talking about paper mile tax. But then on the other hand, she's saying we're going to give out some grants to help people buy electric vehicles.
So this is typical government. The left hand and the right hand haven't thought it through. I think if you're going to do paper mile, you have to do it uniformly. There is an argument that says that the electric car is heavier and they should be paying more, but the reality is it is consuming this amount of road space as much as anybody else, and it's only heavier because the technology is behind the combustion engine in terms of weight distribution to power.
But it's also not been around that long.
No, it hasn't.
It's very early in its journey, really.
So I think, I can accept paper mile, but it has to apply to everyone. And then the issue of getting a grant, then take it away from them. Again, the government needs money now. So giving somebody money now to then get it back over a period of time seems to be the wrong thing. It needs to say we're going to tax your EV more and then give you relief from things. That at least would raise money now.
No, I think let's see what happens with that. I mean, I'm all in favour of a grant because I'd like an electric car soon.
Look, it's a financing decision. So Rachel Reeves has said, I'll give you money in the form of a grant and you pay it back in the form of higher paper mile payments. We'll call that like interest. So she's lending to you. Are you a good credit risk? Probably.
I am.
But the reality, it depends on whether you keep your car and all the rest of it, right?
Yeah.
So the bottom line is I don't think Rachel Reeves should be lending anybody money. She's struggling to borrow. So we shouldn't be asking her to lend that money. She should be repaying her debts as much as possible. So this, to me, goes against the philosophy of what this budget is. It's probably pretty small money in the scheme of things.
Okay. Well, next point is ISAs, which is quite a good one with the IFA hat, but there's talks about the amount you could put in on an annual basis going from whatever it is now, 20K,
20,000.
down to maybe 12, or maybe even as low as $4,000 per annum.
So the ISA is a thing about saving, and it's saving tax-free. You have a pot of money, you can put money into that pot, and you can take it out, and it's done whatever it's done in terms of performance. So there are two types of main ISAs. You've got the cash ISA, which is really just an interest rate one.
Low risk, low yield.
Low risk, yeah. Now, the problem with the cash one is the banks have offered it, and they've just done it to shore up the balance sheet. They've not actually measurably, and I say measurably because I think they have to produce the information, used it to subsidise UK business or UK consumers. We're not using it to grow the economy. So the cash ISA may be very useful for those that are using it. I'm sure they're happy. They're getting a stable return with low risk. But the purpose of it is the government's giving you tax relief. So how's that money being used? It should be using on the other side to grow the economy. That tax relief is not being used to grow the economy. So I'm not in favour of the cash ISA. And I think that my own view is that I would scrap that, or at least start to plan towards scrapping it. The stocks and shares ISA, on the other hand, I think needs to be kept. So I have a different view on the stocks and shares. It's the £20,000 has to go into stocks and shares, with qualifying ones, so it can't be a private business. But where does that go normally? Most of that money goes overseas. So we're using UK tax relief, a bit like a pension, UK tax relief, to invest typically in the US stock market. I don't think the US stock market needs to have a subsidy from the UK taxpayer. So I would be reforming it to restrict how the ISA is able to be invested. I would be creating some sort of qualifying company where it could be, you could still have large listed businesses, but they need to employ a certain percentage of people in the UK. Again, turn this all back to UK employment. And then you've got a government policy which is trying to support hard-working people, which is what this Labour government has said it's about. Not what its policies are saying it's about, but it's what the rhetoric has said. So if you turn and say you get tax relief, but only if you invested in businesses which support employment of hard-working people in the UK.
I mean, if you took that view and said, you know what, you'll get 50% of the relief you would have otherwise got if you put money into an ISA and invest in whatever you like, but you get 100% if you put it in an LSE-based company. It might even fix some of the LSE issues we've seen. More risk capital available, which is something we talked about in episode 1.
Well, the UK needs to get risk capital, and if its risk capital ends up going into the US stock market, it's not available for the UK. So we've got to find a way of ring fencing that capital.
Brilliant. I think that's largely it. Anything that you can think of that's a rumour that we haven't covered?
Well, there was talk about changing to entrepreneurship relief.
Well, yeah, it's already dropped quite.
Well, they've dropped it to $1 million, and the question is, is that? Well, I suppose that's really just advantageous to the Tory capitalists who own businesses. I do have an issue with entrepreneurship relief.
It's not called that anymore, though, is it?
No, it's called business asset disposal relief, but everyone still calls it entrepreneurship relief because it's easier than business asset disposal relief, or BADR. This is a relief that people can pay 14% on their gains of selling a business for the first £1 million, and then it's on back to the normal capital gains rates. The issue I have is really twofold. If you want to use this is a reward currently designed to reward people for having had a business. Now, if we're trying to raise money, we say, look, you've had those rewards. We now can't afford to continue to give you them. Do you want to sell up? That's fine, but you lose your benefit, right? So I would be doing 3 things. First thing I say is, if you retire and don't sell, so you just wind up your business, you don't get the relief. The business relief only applies if you sell your business
as a going concern.
As a going concern to a business that has enough employees. So in other words, your business must continue to operate with a certain number of employees. Then you might say it can't shrink by more than 10% from what it currently is, and it must have a minimum of say 6 people. So you're not looking at families. It's got to be outside the family, so you've got a proper business. And then I would say, and the money has to be kept in the UK for 10 years. Now, when everyone says, but you can't police that, you can't manage that, the seller will find a way to make sure that protection is there.
By the way, this is our view. If we were politicians, as accountants, we like to do whatever makes sense for us.
We have to advise our clients. And our clients, if they can take advantage of the rules legally, then it's our duty to advise them of the risks and rewards of doing so.
But you're right, in terms of pure economic boosting and therefore worth giving the relief for, all those things absolutely make sense. You've created jobs, not just for the now, but for the long term. You've created a business that might continue to trade and generate VAT as well as.
But if you were a sole trader entrepreneur, just on your own, working as a business, and you knew that to get entrepreneur's relief, to get this 10% tax, you couldn't just wind up your business. So guess what? You can't, in the last few years of your work, just live on loans out your company. So it's not sole trade. Let's say it's a company. Can't just take loans out your company and then do a sort of corporate transaction at the end to secure your 10%. You can't do that. You need to sit there and find a buyer. To do a buyer, if you're on your own, nobody's buying anything. So you've got to employ people. You've got to take risks. You've got to grow that business. Now we've got an entrepreneurial person at the helm. That's going to drive the economy forward. So this person who was quite happy with a good salary equivalent on running his own business, now it's not enough. And he's now got an incentive to get other people into jobs, to grow that business, to see it succeed before he retires. It's a great boost to economic growth. Current rules are, that's not what Rachel Reeves' rumour is. The rumour is we're going to abolish it.
Completely.
It's always up in the risk.
I think that would be a shame if they take it away completely, because it's one of those things that, like we've talked about with regards to dividends tax and things, it's one of those things that encourages people to build businesses. But like you say, the rules haven't been tight enough in some ways to actually benefit the UK PLC.
No, I think that's right. I mean, if you want to use tax policy to grow your economy, you don't do it by increasing tax. No one got rich through extra tax. You have to sit there and reduce taxes. You have to give incentives for people to work out, how can I do better for myself? So I think you need to change the culture so that people who are successful are applauded. People look up to those who are successful. The children of today go, I want to be like him. He's successful. Rather than he didn't pay enough tax. He's got some people he pays on the minimum wage. Well, there might be good reasons why he pays people on the minimum wage. That could be the market rate for the work that they're doing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. So I think we need to change that perception. Now, one way of doing it is to exempt those that earn a huge capital gain. But you could put some political anti-embarrassment conditions that say you've got to have people that continue to be employed in that business after the sale, and you've got to keep that money invested in the UK. So you can refuel that. So you get the incentive of, let's say, if you sell your business for over 100 million, you get a capital gains exemption if you keep the money in the country for 10 years and you've employed X thousands of people in the UK. That would stop you selling out when you've got a £40 million business to private equity, force you to try and grow it to get that exemption. So you're now looking at, I'm now going to be successful, I'm going to carry on growing, I'm going to continue to be entrepreneurial. And then when you exit it, you go, I've now got risk capital I have to deploy. So I've now created the risk capital which this country radically needs. And if you give it as a tax exemption, you've got the people of today going, I want to be like that. I can see the benefit of what he's doing. He's keeping his money. He's got it, but it's still being reinvested in UK PLC.
Stuart Thomson for PM.
Well, thank you. Much easier to criticise from the sidelines.
It's so much easier to criticise from the sidelines. I would be terrified for Wednesday if I was Rachel Reeves right now.
I do feel for her. I mean, I think a lot of it you have to say, you got to lay it on, it's her own fault.
We're going to see more tears.
No. But I think she'll be dusting her for CV. Wednesday night, Thursday morning, she'll do really well to say what she's saying in this, with a straight face. This is a budget for a growing Britain, for a recovered Britain, for a rescue. I mean, you don't believe it if it's tax raising.
No.
But at the scale that she's talking, at the end of the day, this is a government that has not put its own taxpayers first. And that's the sad thing of it.
Yeah.
And, we're going to find out. We've got immigration getting an awful lot of money. They're not citizens, they're not vote payers. You get the Chagos Islands who aren't. Irish are giving money to Mauritians for an asset that we used to own. There's a lot that's not benefiting this country. And I think it's a shame that we're having to pay extra tax for this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I doubt we'll see a lot for that tax. It's just going to go into a money pit.
I think that's the interesting point. If you look at Scandinavia, which have got much higher tax rates than us overall, first there's two things to that. One, they actually don't tax the rich as much as us. Their differential in tax rates between the lower and the higher bands are much lower than ours. So we're much more progressive than they are, yet they always talk about the Scandinavian model. But the other thing is people don't care about the tax. I don't think the public will care if they're paying more tax if they felt the government spent it wisely.
That's the biggest problem.
And I think the problem we have is successive government. This is not to blame the current Labour Party. We're going back through decades of politics where the money is much easier to spend it than it is to rein it in. So if you're a democracy, you think, you know what, I need to be elected again. So I'm going to kiss babies, I'm going to open schools and hospitals. You know, I've got to make that difficult decision to cut that benefit for somebody. I know there's not that many people doing it, but I don't want to lose any votes. So I'll defer that decision to next week, next month, next year, next Parliament. And you end up with a situation where you've just got this creaking expenditure, which is inefficient. And you need to have some sort of radical position to assess whether it's effective or not. You can't ask the politician because you're asking them to vote. You're asking them to make a decision to lose some votes. Now, the IMF will do it for you. But then you've lost complete control, and that's what happened in the 70s. And it's a terrifying prospect, the IMF coming. But, you know, we've got to, as a country, we've got to get a grip on our expenditure.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's a whole podcast in its own right. We should be doing an assessment of government expenditure and do a Doge podcast.
Look, it's very hard because we don't know the data, right? But there is no doubt that everybody, I think, in this country can identify areas which they're unhappy with how the government has spent money, whether that's potholes, whether that's waiting lists, whether that's education, whether that's armed forces, you know, whatever it is, whether it's immigration, you know, wherever they are, there's problems. You're never going to get a perfect government, but they're all flawed in their own unique ways. But we surely could do better than look at every area.
Yeah. Well, on that note, what are we talking about next time? The budget is literally within 2 days. I suppose we'll be.
Well, I think we'll have to reflect. We'll have to unpack. We'll have to reflect, and you know, maybe we'll sit there and shed a tear for Rachel for her because she's going to have to come out fighting. But I don't see her lasting. I worry about what's next because I'm not sure there's many options that are any better. But yeah, I think that's it. But thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.